Hello and welcome to Radio Writeoff. I'm Quill Scratch.
I'm Zoe.
And I'm not a hat.
We never noticed. Not a hat is joining us for the first time this round, which is exciting. It's good to have someone else on the team.
He's taking the spot of our beautiful boy. He is sadly dead now, but he is our beautiful boy, Dub's rewatcher.
He got run over by a bus or something.
Yeah, still waiting at that bus stop. But our new beautiful boy, not a hat, is taking his spot. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm clearly better than Dubs in every way.
I mean, you're not waiting for a bus, and you're also alive. So, I mean, those are 2 points pretty in your favor.
Yeah, I don't have as attractive of hair. Oh, wait, I do, because he cut his hair.
His hair's all gone. That hair's gone.
This is very sad.
Okay, we should talk about some stories or something, probably, though.
Right, yeah. Let's try and prevent from getting too off topic, like last time.
Dub's hair is a pretty important topic.
It's true.
It's what keeps the write-off going at this point.
That and, what's the other story that we always... anyways.
Start recursion.
Oh, yeah,
Let's not do that again.
Oh, okay.
At this point, it is becoming a bit of a recursive topic.
Welcome to a Start Recursion cast.
Okay, so, yeah.
So, I suppose first thing we should talk about is the prompt.
Yeah, prompts. I know I don't usually care that much about the prompt because I don't usually write for these, but I know a lot of people really did not like this prompt. Mostly because it was kind of a joke in and of itself.
I really didn't have a problem with it. I mean, my view on the prompt has always been that it has actually very little impact on the stories most of the time. I mean, it does kind of seem to steer the general tone of the write-off to some extent, but, like, I don't really think it's a barrier to people writing what they want or writing good stories or any of the stuff that kind of tends to come up with people being, prompt, you know. I don't know. I mean, I guess I didn't really have a problem with it.
I mean, for me, this is the first time I've really struggled with a prompt. Like, don't get me wrong, I think it's a fine prompt, and I think the fact that the stories that have come out of it are so varied is a sign that it has been a good prompt. But for me, it just didn't work. I really struggled to come up with something, which is why this is the first original minific round I haven't entered.
I know I like literally just said that I never enter write-offs, but even then I can still like kind of think of an inkling of something, and I had absolutely nothing for this prompt. And from what I noticed, it seemed like there was a little less story, like a generally smaller amount of stories than the past original minific rounds.
Were there less stories?
I think there's about let me check.
47.
I remember looking at
There's
this.
47.
Yeah, and I think the past two have come out to somewhere in like the mid-60s.
Yeah, and to be fair, like a year and a half ago, we were getting 100 plus on some of the minific rounds. But
those were the pony rounds too.
True.
Yeah, and that was I Regret Nothing, where one person submitted like 18 stories in. I think it was Everyday who submitted 18 stories.
Still a legend to this day.
The legend himself.
I met him at BronyCon. He's pretty cool. He's actually really speedy, just like that rabbit in his avatar.
Nice. I need to meet more write-off people. It just needs
Yeah,
to
you
happen.
need to like come to BronyCon or something.
I don't. You all suck.
All right.
All right.
So yeah, that's the prompt.
We didn't have much to say there, did we?
Right. Next is I think just like general talk about the trends in the round. You know, trends with like the stories, anything that we noticed. For me, I talked about this a little bit in like the little private chat we have to plan these write-offs or these radio write-offs. But in every round that I've like read, there's usually a couple of stories that I can point at and say I really really like this story. Like last round for me, it was Solitude of the Modern Businessman. And this round, there was really nothing for me here. And most of it came down to taste. I'm looking at my little mini review notes here, and pretty much every single story here it's all right, but it's just not to my taste. Just a lot of these stories just were not for me. I'm not part of their target audience, and it was kind of surprising that so many of the stories I was outside of the target audience, because usually this doesn't happen.
Interesting.
Fair. I mean, for me, I think the most noticeable thing about this round, obviously there's a lot of comedy stories. It's a jokey prompt, that's what we expect. But I think what's really interesting is looking at how the stories that aren't comedies respond to the prompt. And a lot of them have gone for quite heavy prompt use. Like, even in being a serious story for a jokey prompt. You know, they're very much using that theme of I just want a sandwich. And I thought that was a bit weird. It gave the round sort of a semblance of all being the same, you know? I spoke about how there's variety, and there is variety in the writing, but there isn't so much variety in some of the ideas.
Right.
Yeah, I guess the two main things you tended to see were people literally wanting a sandwich, and then the whole witches that manipulate sand thing, which happened in several stories.
Good old puns.
It's I think it's one of the most specific prompts we've had in a while. And when I say specific, I mean it like it's not like most of the prompts are usually just like short phrases or idioms or something like that. But this one is much more specific than that, I think. It doesn't have as much of a general idea that can be interpreted, however, as much as it does give you an actual situation to talk about, if that makes sense.
It is longer. I mean, as in, like, there are literally more words in it, which helps make it a lot more specific. I think. I don't know.
I think what's really interesting is, I mean, I've only read the finalists, so just put that out there. I have not read anything that hasn't made it through, and apologies to everyone who didn't make it through for that.
Well, I technically read the maze one. I looked at the maze one. I completed the maze. Third try.
Nicely done. Yeah, I think I would have liked to see more things that weren't such literal interpretations of the prompt. Like, I'm pretty sure there's a sandwich in every one of the finalists, like an actual sandwich.
Not the limerick one, I don't believe.
Not okay. It's
you should
okay,
reread
but that's
that
a don't
one
know, please.
Technically, there is. Well, at the very end of the limerick one, he's like, "Yeah, just give me a sandwich."
Oh yeah, there's a sandwich at the end mentioned.
No, I guess there is.
But
Get
like,
fucked, Hat.
what's interesting is what's interesting is no one's really taken sort of that spirit of the prompt of, you know, someone just being fed up with all this bullshit and just wanting something mundane. And everyone's gone with this very literal interpretation, or at least all the finalists have. And I thought that was particularly interesting, given how weird and wacky the situations that people managed to come up with were.
Right.
Nobody just went for
interesting.
Spirit of the prompt rather than word of the prompt. But that's just me.
No, I agree.
All right. Is that all we wanted to say about the round and general trends?
That's all I've got.
That's all. Yeah, that's all I've got to say about the round in general. Aside from that, I just have thoughts on specific stories. So,
all right,
you can take this wherever you want.
I believe our next section is the dreaded most controversial, in which we all argue about stories that we either really, really liked or really, really disliked, or in Zoe's case, just didn't care about.
Yeah, okay, so I will say there's one story in here that I actually did legitimately like and wasn't just like, this is okay. And that is Two Messages, the free verse poem.
Okay.
I actually really did enjoy that story. I didn't enjoy it so much that it was like the one that I can point to from this run and say, this is a good story. I mean, that's not to say that it is not a good story. It is a very good story. But it definitely didn't jump out at me as much as some of the ones in the past have. But I think compared to the rest of the stories here, this is definitely my favorite.
It's one I'd like to spend some more time with than I did in my huge binge of the finalists, and try and get a bit more out of. I thought it was... Actually, now I stop and look back at it, I think this is the only one that isn't so direct with its prompt usage.
Yeah, this one seems to really go with what you said about the spirit of the phrase, I just want my sandwich.
Yeah. Actually, looking back, I'd completely forgotten this exists.
Yeah, because the messenger is just trying to deliver the message in this like horrible, twisted world where everyone's dying and there's corpses littering the sides of the roads. They just want to deliver this message because it's their job. And I think that's what I got from the story. I might be reading it wrong, but I think it's the one that definitely has the most figurative interpretation of, I just want to get this mundane thing. I just want to do my job, even though everything around me is falling apart.
It is possible that the thing he's delivering is the sandwich. I don't think that was ever said, but...
the sandwich delivery boy just trying to make it through, like, horrible apocalypse.
No, actually, I think it did actually say message for, so it probably
Hmm.
isn't an actual sandwich. But yeah, I don't know.
I think it was like message for Spencer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe it was the name of the town. I wasn't quite sure on how that worked. That one had some interesting bits. I liked the. I mean, I'm not much for free verse, I guess, but I liked how in the bit with the bike, the rhythm of the poem actually changes to kind of match the kind of feel of pedaling there.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
it did some neat free verse stuff, which I really know very little about, but it was neat.
Yeah, the rhythm of this one is really, really nice to read. It was very, very satisfying to read it in my head, which for me is a really, really big component of any poetry. Is how the rhythm of the words and how it reads in your head, how that can give even more meaning, and how that can impact your enjoyment of the piece. And I thought this one did its free verse stuff really, really well.
So, because someone has to, I guess I'm arguing against this one. Um, I'm gonna be honest. I really wanted to like this one. I like, I like poetry. I quite like free verse poetry.
Because it's like super literary.
Bec- partly because it's just it's quite fun. And it plays a lot more with rhythm than prose does, and I just enjoy the way words sound. Um, I also, I'm gonna be perfectly honest. Everyone who's been around in the write-off long enough to have read more than 3 of my reviews knows that I'm obsessed with the bookend structure. Which, thinking on it for a second, is basically a sandwich. Can we just appreciate? Can we just appreciate that that might actually be one of the
Quill, I
ways
don't
in
want
which
you to
the
talk
author
to me
used this
ever
prompt?
again.
It did have that framing in there, yeah.
And I'm a
I
sucker for
never
that.
thought about that. I mean, now you bringing that to my attention, it does make sense.
I'm a sucker for using strikeout as a gimmick,
I
particularly in
didn't like the
poetry.
strikeout section in here for some reason. It
But yeah,
did.
I
I didn't quite understand what they meant.
was not a fan of the execution of all of those things that I should like by right as the kind of person who likes these things. Don't get me
I
wrong.
actually thought about that strikeout section for a while in this poem, and I think the reason I decided it didn't work well was because the relationship between the unstruck out lines and the struck out lines were different for each pairing.
Mm,
And I'd have to go back and look for it exactly what it was again. But one time it seemed like the struck out line was almost like a continuation, but that was struck out. Another time it seemed like it was a replacement that was struck out. I don't know.
yeah, no, I
I feel
definitely
like
got
more
that whilst
careful
reading.
word choice would have made that better. But I mean, I'm no
Yeah,
poet, so
I agree. I did not quite understand just what the strikeouts were trying to imply, or
well,
what they meant.
I think what they were doing was they were showing like his hope. It was like the city gates, and then it was struck out the gates of heaven, and then it was like this and that.
Okay,
So it was showing like his hope. But it was also to
his
some
hope getting
extent
dashed.
perhaps foreshadowing him. No, it was at the time he thought his hope was coming true, that he was making it. Because he's like, oh look, I made it, and he rips off his mask like he's gonna survive, and then he dies because he's like, oh, these masks aren't that important at the beginning. Um,
Right.
I don't know.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
I
can
mean
see that.
that bit in particular felt really jumbled to me, but I do think there are several places where the meaning just isn't quite there, and it might just be I need to spend more time with it.
It's possible, but I mean, your reaction is legitimate as well. So
Mm. It I have read better free verse, but it was good. It was well executed. Um,
It was definitely a breath of fresh air for me. Not seeing
no
like a
pun
literal
intended, I
sandwich in the
assume.
story. Okay, so yes, but no pun intended, right? But it was a nice, it was a refreshing palate cleanser. It was nice. It didn't have like an actual sandwich in the literal story. It was a free verse poem instead of prose, and it was nice. It was definitely a nice change of pace.
it is nice to see things that are different. Like they do kind
Definitely.
of tend to stick out, and that's one of the reasons I think more serious stories tend to do somewhat better in the minific rounds, because it's easy to write jokes and people tend to write a fair amount of jokes. I don't know, maybe I'm
Hmm.
wrong, but I feel like there's just less serious stories.
I definitely think there's an attitude that joke stories, even when they're done really, really well, are just easier to write, so they tend to get voted lower. That's something I've seen in comments before, although quite a long time ago. And I don't know, like, I mean, it's everyone's right to vote however they want, but
Oh, sure.
I think, sometimes it's actually worth stopping and thinking, you know what, this is really well written.
Yeah, I mean, there is like I think there's like a threshold there. Like when I say joke fic, I mean the ones that are like just one joke in 700
Oh,
words.
yeah.
You know. But like if you run into one that's like actually a comedy where there's like a joke every 2 or 3 lines, I mean I would say those are hard. Like I've never written one. I don't even know how I'd start. Like when I run into something like that, I do think I tend to vote it up. But I feel like it's really easy to grab one idea and just throw it into a story somehow. I don't know. Easy enough to write something for the minific rounds.
Now, we're supposed to be arguing over things in this section.
We're not very arguey people.
There is not going to be a fic that causes more argument this round than Attack of the 50-Foot Donut. Okay, so, dear author of Attack of the 50-Foot Donut, I have no idea who you are. I have before considered writing a short story in the form of multiple limericks in a row. I wanted to let you know that because I wanted you to know that this is something I have considered doing. This is totally okay.
Before he tells you how much he hated your story, he wants you to know that it's personal. You stole his idea, and he's about to really lay the smackdown.
Every time I've considered doing this, my immediate reaction afterwards is, why on earth would I do that? And I have to admit, this story very nearly proved me wrong. So, well done. This is fantastically written. These are excellent, excellent limericks. But I don't think... I just cannot quite get over the fact that the limerick does not work in this format for me. I know other people have loved it. Other people have really, really enjoyed this piece and haven't found a problem with it. So I am in a minority here. But I think just, the rhythm of a limerick, right, tells a story in and of itself. The first line, sets up the whole basic premise of the story. And if you just listen to the way... It's really hard to explain without literally, sounding out the rhythm.
Right.
But the way the rhythm progresses through a single limerick is almost a structure of a very, very, very short story. The final line is just exceedingly conclusive in the way that it ends. And I think stringing one limerick after another, leaving you with 3 lines with the same meter, and a particularly strange meter at that, it doesn't quite work for me. And I think every limerick in this story has to feel like it is a complete section, and that really hamstrings you for telling a story that flows and has a continuous narrative.
Did pretty good on a fair amount of that. I mean, like as in like most limericks were kind of a scene in and of themselves.
I mean, it does really well with it. I'm genuinely impressed at what you've done.
Yeah, I mean the limericks in here aren't bad, but I think when I read a limerick in my head, the final line has a sense of finality to it. Like it's the end of the story, and then it starts up again with another one in a row.
And it just gets tiring, doesn't it? Just reading that many endings.
Yeah. One thing I think that does work really well with the limericks, though, is that limericks are often very silly. And he's paired this author has paired a very silly poem format with a very silly story. And I think it works very well that way. It gives the whole thing kind of a air of ridiculousness.
Yeah.
So when you get to something like, the streets are awash with a flood of ganache, like... just the ridiculous in that like really comes through, and I thought that was really cool.
Oh yes, some of the lines in here are great.
It is, like I say, it is fantastic, and it very nearly came close to convincing me that this could work.
They're not poorly written limericks. It's just the limerick as a structure in and of itself is significantly tougher, I think, to string a complete story together than other things.
So you feel it would have worked better, perhaps, if they'd been more careful about making each limerick its own statement?
I think perhaps what would have worked maybe something I've been toying around with in the back of my head for a while is alternating between limericks and something else. I don't know if it would work, but it's
What if
worth
you
considering.
reversed the limerick structure and did
we have the technology.
we have the words. Yeah. But what if you reversed the limerick structure, and kind of put them together forward and back? I don't know. I should stop theorizing. I don't do poetry.
Now, there's a lot of cool ideas you can do with limericks, and I think hiding limericks inside other things is often really fun. So yeah, there's a lot you can do with them, and this is really good. But at the end of the day, stringing them one after the other doesn't quite work, even if you do them perfectly.
What if you combined the rhyme scheme and the limericks? Because you've
dear.
got AABBC, right?
It's usually AABBA.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
But you could go like
anyways,
AABBA, BBCCB, etc. That would be really interesting.
You gave it a little more cohesion.
Yeah, I mean that's something a lot of people do with sonnets. Mono's mentioning in the chat at the moment. Yeah, sonnets do that occasionally. When you have a chain of sonnets, you sort of mix together the way they have their rhyme schemes, but you can also mix up the way the quatrains share their rhyme schemes in some sonnets. It's really interesting.
Huh.
But yes,
interesting. Well,
that's
maybe enough about the poems.
Yes. Is there anything else we want to talk of in most controversial before we move on?
Let me look at my review notes here. I'm looking at all the stories because I read all the finalists. I've got a little sense about all of them. Nothing though is really jumping out at me as this is the story we have to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, it's particularly with this part of the podcast. There's not that much to say.
Because I think most controversial works best when one of us is actually very, very convicted about something, and then another person is very, very convicted on an opposing thing. And a lot of these stories, like I said earlier, are just really in one ear and out the other for me. That's not to say that they're bad, but there's not really enough here for me to grab onto and say, yes, I believe in this.
I don't know. I mean, there is at least one story that I particularly disliked in some ways, but I don't know if it's worth bringing up something like that just to bash it. But
well, one of us can try and defend it. We'll see how it goes.
Sure.
Well, what did you guys think of Corpuscular?
Corpuscular.
No, not crepuscular. Corpuscular. Those are actually different words that mean different things.
This was actually the ones that I liked a bit more than the others.
Really?
It definitely stuck out. Yeah, it was one of the earlier ones I read, so maybe I just wasn't worn out with it. But I remember reading in the comments a lot of people thought that it kind of just checked off this kind of checklist of a broken home, which I guess I can see reading it after seeing that comment, but it just kind of made sense to me. That didn't bother me that much.
I felt like the scenes in this story were extremely disconnected.
Right.
The one thing that really got me about this story was that I realized afterwards you could read the scenes in just about any order, and it wouldn't actually change how much sense the story makes. There's very little connective tissue in the story. There's I don't know. And that is something that tends to bug me about, quote, literary style writing, is that, they leave a lot up to the reader's imagination, and they want you to draw these conclusions and stuff from it, and, that can be good and bad. It tends to annoy me to some extent, when it's done too heavily. But I felt like this story, it didn't actually work with the things it put in. Right, okay, there's two lines in the story specifically that demonstrate, okay, at one point the main character says I was wrong about a lot of things, but nowhere in the story did I see them drawing conclusions to be wrong about, and the other one was we assume we're pretty good people, pretty decent sorts of people, but the thing is the main character doesn't actually, do anything in the story either, so it's making these conclusions that sound dramatic and sound interesting, but we don't actually have any action by the character or decisions to judge any of that on, so it sounds nice, but I didn't feel there was actually any substance there.
I was actually gonna say that I actually really, really like that line, because I think all the other people in the family are kind of actively doing something wrong, But I think the protagonist here has a lot of guilt because in all of these scenes, they don't do anything. They don't step in. Even though they love every single person in this family, they don't want to protect them. And I think they kind of, at least this is what I got from it, they feel bad. They feel guilty because they never stepped in and did anything to help.
You might be right, and that's as valid an interpretation of the story as any, which is, I guess, what it comes down to is I don't like having to make up an interpretation out of such flimsy reasoning. You know, like you can say that, and I can't honestly point to anything in the story and say you're wrong, and Quill could come up with something that's completely the opposite, and I still couldn't point to anything in the story and say it was wrong. You know, like that kind of bugs me. Like, I don't know. I don't want to say that I want to be told what to think, but I also like if someone's making a point, I want them to make a point, you know? And that's I think where like I disagree with some of this stuff with like Dubs, because Dubs is like, no, I'll draw my own conclusions, like, you know, just throw some words around and I'll pull a point out of thin air, and like it just does not work for me.
I'm very much with Dubs on this one.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to say
I'm usually with Dubs too. Sorry to turn on your hand.
Hat, you're doing a very bad job of replacing him.
I mean, we can add some conflict here. It'll be good for the overall podcast narrative. I don't know.
I really liked this story. I have to admit, I agree with you in that I think if more had been done by the main character, that final line would have had more impact.
Any impact at all.
But I think it does have some impact in that, you know, I think it's very clearly making a statement about connecting that idea of forgetfulness to being pretty decent sort of people. And what's interesting is it doesn't talk about forgiveness, it talks about forgetfulness. And, you know, forgive and forget, it's a common phrase. Those two ideas are very closely linked in pop culture and in culture in general. So I think what's interesting is, you know, we always talk about forgiveness being like a ideal to strive for, generally speaking. We should forgive people is sort of one of the lessons that's hammered into us as kids, and then we go, whatever, who cares? They stole my sandwich. But, you know,
about donuts.
I'm trying to tie this into the prompt somehow. But yeah, no, I think, you know, when they're saying we assume we're pretty good people, pretty decent sorts of people, there's so much loaded into that sentence with the word assume. So much saying, you know, we assume this, we think everything's okay, but it isn't. You know, there's that hidden but there. But what's interesting is that the character never comes out and says it. I think another story does something very interesting with that this round, actually. It was... where is it? Housewife. Housewife does something really interesting in that I've seen a lot of stories that do similar things to Housewife. Housewife comes out and sort of has someone being calm and pretending nothing's going wrong and then commits a murder or something like that. You know, but in all those other stories, when I've read that idea, you know, it does... it basically has that moment where the character stops pretending. They come out of denial. And Housewife takes that denial right through to the end.
Right.
I think it's really interesting that we've got two stories that follow that idea of taking denial through to the end when that has nothing to do with the prompt. Because both of these, denial is very much the entire subject of that final section of Corpuscular. I just think it's really interesting that that's happened. And I think it's a really cool message to take away from it. Like I say, I think it would be better if the main character had done something that needed to be denied. And I have to admit, I'm not making as much sense as I should out of the penultimate section.
I'd be shocked if you could make any more sense out of it than you have. There's just nothing there to work with.
When you mentioned forgive and forget, I'm reading the story, and right before it says we assume we're pretty good people, it says we forget.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, that's what he was referencing.
Oh,
that's the exact line I was referring to. But
I was gonna make a clever. Oh, look at this clever reference, son of a bitch.
Already made it.
Whatever. Already made it. Quill is the better man.
But yeah.
But like you're drawing that completely from like that last paragraph and that last line. Like anyways, I should stop.
Well, I mean, I'm always one who will put a lot of emphasis on final lines and opening lines. You know, I think.
Yeah, me
Well,
too.
that was part of why it bugged me so much, is
Yeah,
because it was,
fair.
this is the final dramatic line. Like, we think, and it's got all this implication weighted into it, and then I get done and I'm like, what? Like, where is this coming from? Like, I don't know.
It is a bit flimsy, I have to admit, just from a construction perspective, just looking at it, it's a really weak sentence to end on.
Construction, yeah, that was my eventual conclusion, was that each of these scenes is evocative. Like, I will say that. Each of these scenes is a very evocative scene in a lot of ways. There is just no connection between them. Like, structurally, the story has very little. Mechanically, it's actually really good. That was my conclusion.
Once again,
Sure.
we all sort of come to an agreement in the section
Yeah,
where we're supposed to be arguing.
I definitely agree that it could use some more meat on its bones in regards to connective tissue and making that last line stronger. But just because the last line and the story is not as strong as it could be, doesn't mean that there's nothing we can take from it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it might be deliberately weak, but that's me just, trying to defend this with everything I've got.
Fair enough.
But yeah, anyway, Firstly, I think we should move on. But secondly, I think we should definitely rethink this section of the podcast because we're not very good at arguing.
We're not very good at arguing.
This is what we get for being agreeable people.
This is the curse we bear.
But it's okay because the next section of the podcast is the part that we're all so very, very good at. Author guessing.
Author guessing. I just have one guess. One guess this whole round. And this is, I'm famously bad at making guesses like these based on intuition. I'll have you know this right now. But a regrettable incident, the way that it reads to me, feels like it's something that Monochorus would say. I would like to officially guess a regrettable incident from Monochorus.
Actually, you mentioned that. I had that feeling. I had that feeling whilst reading it.
Yeah, it's got, I know Mono said that he likes writing dark things, and this is a pretty dark story.
Yeah, the last minific I remember him writing was, some guy having a nice day before the atom bomb was dropped on his head. He does tend to like that dark stuff.
Yeah, I think it... Yeah, I would definitely back you up with that one. That's a good guess.
I really don't. I mean, it's as good a guess as any, I guess, but, I didn't see anything that would make me say this has to be Monochorus, which honestly is a sign that his English is definitely improving, which is a good thing.
Oh yeah, definitely. His English is great.
Yeah, go Mono.
So, go Mono, yeah. Okay. I'm gonna guess that the attack of the 50-foot donut was Mike or Balbunny, and that Two Messages was Horizon, because they're the two people I know of who do poetry, and Mike is definitely the structured poetry guy, and Horizon is definitely the free verse poetry guy. So those are just my random guesses. They may probably be wrong, but
that's a reasonable way to suggest. Oh boy, can I guess anything? The answer is probably no. To be perfectly honest, nothing else, apart from Regrettable Incident. Which did read very much like I was reasonably confident, not perfectly confident, but I was like, yeah, this seems like the sort of thing Mono would write. Nothing else did I just didn't get any impression of who might have written them from them. But then I'm very, very bad at author guessing, so the fact that I even got one impression throughout the entire round is probably an improvement over normal for me.
Reading a regrettable incident, I have it right in front of me. Here's a sentence that, when I really kind of tipped me off. He recognized Steve, his former foreman, the scab who had brown-nosed the boss to save his job when the slaughterhouse had shut down 2 years ago. That small phrase there, the scab who had brown-nosed the boss, is two kind of, I don't want to say idioms, but they're, not quite as literal, if that makes sense. And those seems like the kinds of phrases that Mono would use, because he's trying to get better at using phrases like that. And it's not a bad sentence at all. I'm not...
Actually, it'll work quite well. I really like this one.
It's a great sentence.
I really liked Regrettable Instant.
Yeah, it's a great story. And it just seems like the type of sentence that has that kind of mix of, I guess, idioms and less literal sentences that Mono would use.
You could be right.
If
Just
that makes
story-wise,
sense.
I think the last line on that one really threw me, because I did not connect him killing a guy with him going to prison for some weird reason.
It
It
took
really
me a
threw me
long
out.
time.
Um,
I don't know. That's so weird, but it took me a long time.
I think it could use a little bit of strengthening near the end.
I think it has something to do with main characters, because
True.
like this guy is like struggling. He's like trying things. Like that's not the sort of main character who usually ends up. Like it was a really sharp. It might have been a bit of mood whiplash almost.
Yeah.
Like I feel like if it had been foreshadowed more, like him struggling to like not be a thief or a murderer to survive or something like that, and then like at this point like because Skywriter said something at the advanced writing panel at BroningCon. He's like, one thing you can do is have your character struggling to overcome a personal problem like um, an internal mental thing of some sort. At the same time, they're struggling to deal with external problems. And I really like that, And if there'd been something in there like him struggling with not being a thief and a murderer to survive at the same time as he struggles, to make his way through the day, and then at the end he finally snaps. I think that would have made it a lot stronger. But I mean,
Right.
everything's clear in hindsight, I guess. So.
I mean,
Yeah.
it definitely seems like it could use just a little bit more length. Not so much length that it needs like a couple extra thousand words. It's not like a story that would be better suited to a short story round. But I mean, it's at 743 words, which is cutting it really close. And I think with just a couple maybe extra paragraphs here and there, maybe bringing it to around 1,000 or so words, it could be a lot stronger.
Yeah.
And it's already pretty strong. I mean, this is a pretty good story. But yeah.
If we're still doing guessing a little bit, I guess, Dubs always says that his story is the one that I really hate, so I guess we're going to have to go with Corpuscular for Dubs this round. And I wouldn't say I hate that story, but it is definitely the one that annoyed me the most.
Well, fair enough.
We could also go with New Estrus in York, because that one also struck me as very literary, and I know Dubs loves his literary fiction, so...
Now, have any of us read many that aren't in the finals?
I read The Maze.
Question.
I did do a full slate,
And I solved
then
The Maze.
Before finals. So I have read. So if you want an honorable mention, actually, I do have one.
Fantastic. Go ahead.
I was actually really sad that Scratch didn't make it into finals. Rat Lab's story, Caliponia is his fanfic name, about um, people making space pirates making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches from scratch after like it was good. You'd probably get a kick out of it, Quill, because it's got an experimental narration where it's just like one half of the dialogue. Um, it did have its own problems as well, but I really liked that one, and I was sad it didn't make it into finals.
Nice.
All
Having a
right.
look at it now, it looks really nice.
I might read that later. It depends on if I feel it. It's the last day of summer. I gotta squeeze as much as I can out of
It's only
today.
700 words.
That's
Right.
true.
So to round this all up,
I actually wait. I do want to give a shout out. I know I said the only one I read is The Maze, or This Sandwich is Amazing by Jay.
Right.
I do want to give a shout out to this story because it's the perfect Jay story. It says, "Fuck you, Writeoff. I'm gonna do what I want," and I really, it was fun. It's a fun maze.
It was fun. I mean,
I know it
is
wasn't
kind of...
fun for people using the serif font, but because I switched to sans serif as soon as the option was available, I was able to get this maze no problem.
Wow. Aren't you
Wow.
just better than everyone else with your sans serif font?
I don't want to explicitly say that I'm better than everyone else, but yes,
You just
I
want
am, in
everyone
fact,
else
better
to
than
like
everyone
infer
else.
it from
Exactly.
Yeah.
I want to read between the lines on that one.
Yeah.
yeah, it really was.
That is fun. I do like that kind of thing happens, that people are comfortable enough to submit meta jokes like that, and that like people enjoy those. Like I don't know. I
Yeah,
think
the
we had
dedication to making this maze is real.
yeah. So I don't know. It is fun to see that sort of stuff happen. Even if it is just a joke. It is nice that people
Right.
laugh at that sort of thing.
All right, I suppose personal recommendations to finish.
Personal recommendations.
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
All right then.
So there's only I know I've already talked extensively about two messages. But if Freeverse is your thing, I really like this one. I think that the rhythm of this is really, really nice. What else? I think there was one other that I really, really enjoyed reading, and I wanted to give a little shout out to Nuestra Senora.
Yes.
I like this one. I thought I think this was definitely one of the best written ones of this round. The very ending sentence about like rubbing her fingers over the thing and like feeling the power on her fingertips, that was a little on the nose for me, kind of cheesy, but I think the rest of the story was pretty good.
I actually had some of the same problems with this one as I had with Corpuscular, because the conflict in the story just doesn't seem to really be addressed, and like the meaning of yeah. Well, once again, someone has gone literary and left out the connective tissue, in my opinion. Although not as poorly as Crepuscular, not as extremely as Crepuscular was, but it was an enjoyable read for me. I just felt like it was once again structurally somewhat unsound, but yeah, I did enjoy it.
It's one I enjoyed a lot. I just thought it was very well written and I enjoyed it.
That's because you and me kind of like literary fiction.
I just like reading pretty words. Can we just have more
Dude,
pretty words on my monitor,
awesome.
please? That's all I want.
Numbers wants to recommend Reuben Knight. That was.
I read Reuben Knight. Here's my little. I read every single finalist and I wrote a little sentence. Here's my sentence for Reuben Knight. I like the concept, but I just dislike Church a lot, and I was thinking about how much of an asshole I thought Church was instead of what she was saying. Because I mean, I'm not saying she's like a bad person, but I wouldn't want to have a conversation with her, you know?
As a drama, I feel like that story worked, and I said this in the comments as well, but it sells itself as hard sci-fi, and it's really bad at being hard sci-fi. Like, it had a zillion nitpicks, like, yeah.
It's not a bad story at all. I thought it was actually pretty good.
It's just bad hard sci-fi. As a story, it's fine, but it should have just been soft sci-fi or even fantasy or something, because, yeah.
Well, the numbers do seem to sort of add up. At least, like, the statement of, you know...
They're boosting at half a G the entire way. The trip would have been 6 hours,
Could you maybe say that the Mr. numbers add up?
Need to eat.
The Mr. numbers add up.
Because he recommended the story, and that's why we're talking about it. Huh?
just
Come on!
We are greatly distressing Mr. Numbers right now.
He's giving me many eyebrows.
Anyway, Hat, did you have anything you wanted to recommend?
I think we've covered most of my stuff. I mean, the ones you could just go with the ones at the top of my slate. I really enjoyed Sit In. It's my top pick right now. That one is one I think that did its characters very well. It did its setting crisply. Like, it evoked a lot in few words, and it had a depth to it that I really appreciated. And it is almost a complete story. Like, it's got the beginning and middle and ending thing kind of sort of going on. It wasn't perfect, I don't think. I think I would have liked to get inside the bartender, well, the guy who's making the burgers. I don't know if he was actually, I think he was a bartender. Anyways, I'd have liked to get inside his head a little more. But other than that, I really enjoyed that one. It was I think a good mix of excellent prose and good storytelling.
Yeah, there were some really good moments in that one. I liked it a lot. Can I throw in a couple of recommendations just to be...
Sure, throw in as many as you want.
Go for it.
Okay, let's recommend all of them. No, I have to admit...
Quill recommends Attack of the 50-Foot Donut.
Oh, God.
We'll recommend for food.
Yep.
Quill holding up a sign at the side of the road. I need help. I'll recommend your story.
I really enjoyed Parmesan. Just to be... I know it's a bit of a weird story, and it's, it takes a while to get to its point. It's quite slow, but I just thought it was nice and silly and fun, and it made me smile, and I like things that make me smile a lot. I don't talk about that a lot in the write-off. I'm often fairly serious in my criticisms.
Right.
I'm like, oh, I really like the structure here, and I really like the way this played with wine metaphors or whatever.
The wine symbolism is very
Right.
strong in this one. Very well aged.
But you know, at the end of the day, all I really want is something that's going to evoke some emotion in me, and Parmesan made me smile. I liked
It
it.
Yeah, it is a rare
It got a
example
smile out
of
me.
it is a rare example of a fic that's not a joke, but is also still a positive message is not the right word. Positive feeling more. It is like a feel good kind of thing without being a joke, and that is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
It was kind of serious, but also kind of pleasant, as opposed to some of the serious ones, which are just shooting and nasty or horror, whatever it ends up being.
Sure.
That said, if we want to
It
talk
was
about
it was a
comedies,
nice moment of kind of fluff and levity in a round that had some pretty dark stories.
Surprisingly.
but yeah, if we do want to talk about the comedies, I also really quite like Roastbusters. It's one we haven't mentioned yet. And I just feel like it would be wrong of me not to mention it here, because that final sentence just made me laugh like mad. All in all, it was genuinely just funny all the way through. But I enjoyed that final sentence.
Yeah, I felt like the exchange right before the final sentence was a little bit pat or something. I don't know. That story actually reminded me more of The Princess Bride than anything, because like they've got this sandwich description that would do Miracle Max proud. He's like, oh, the lettuce is so crispy and the mutton is nice and lean. I just had this picture of like Miracle Max and The Princess Bride spring into my head, and then a little later, out comes this rodent of unusual size, and I'm like,
Is that what ROUS meant? I did not even. I thought it was like a sandwich topping. Like you could have really put this ingredient on the sandwich. It would have been a lot funnier. I didn't know what roos was.
From Princess Bride, ROUS.
I
Yes.
know what it is. I've seen that movie. I just
Okay.
didn't put the words in. I didn't make the connection.
I think my final recommendation, I'm going to be perfectly honest, like, I know that Zoe said, she doesn't, like, particularly like a lot of these, or at least, they were in one ear out the other, you said. I actually really enjoyed a lot of them. Not in a sort of, I want to dive into this and dissect it and have a lot of literary fun with it, but in a, you know what, this was just fun to read kind of way. I enjoyed a lot of them for that. But I think I'm just going to have to, if I could only recommend one more, it's probably going to be My Kingdom for a Snack.
Okay.
And I'm going to recommend that. I know there are some problems with it. I agree there's quite a few problems in it, particularly in continuity of the main characters, mental age, essentially, throughout the fic. It definitely seems to change. It's not constant, but it is just a really nice thing to read, It has lovely repetition in it of the main theme, and it's just childlike and lovely, and it explores a significantly more serious message than I think you expect on a first reading. And I like that.
Sure.
That was
Yeah,
a
it's
nice one.
fables aren't usually my thing, but this one it did get a smile out of me. It wasn't like a huge like ear to ear smile. It was more like a soft little smile, but it was
Sure.
nice.
Sure. Yeah, I enjoyed that one.
So I guess that about wraps it up for this round.
I think that wraps it up. Yeah.
So from all of us here at Radio Writeoff, we wish you all
Here in the Radio Write-Off offices.
definitely an office. We wish you all an enjoyable rest
Merry
of round.
Christmas.
And a
Happy
Merry
Dubsmas.
Christmas. Merry
And
Dubsmas.
happy birthday.
Oh, yes. Happy birthday to Dubs. Belated,
Who?
but I
Who?
guess that's it.
Who the fuck is Dubs?
Oh, he's some guy we lost at a bus stop.